Come on guys, let's learn Docker today. So what is Docker? Docker is a platform that enables containerization. So let's learn about containerization first. So in old days, developer deploys their application on physical servers. Then after some years, they started deploying their application on virtual machines. So we know that these virtual machines are installed on top of this physical server. So deploying application on physical server or these VMs works fine, but the pain point is, so once the developer develops this application, he deploy that application on dev environment and he tests everything here, and if everything works, then he transfer that code to testers and tester test the same code in their environment. But the same code might not work in this particular environment because of some dependencies or OS packages or anything. Now developer says it is working on my environment and tester says it is not working on my environment. Now whose fault it is, developers or testers? So fault is with environment setup, right? So at that time there was a requirement for a technology irrespective of environment the app should work. So the tech is nothing but the containerization. So in container, instead of code, we package code, dependency, config file, everything. Docker is a platform that enables containerization. We generally run these containers on top of a virtual machine. And container is not a replacement for virtual machines. We generally use VM and container together, and we run multiple container on top of virtual machine. And all of these containers use OS or kernel of this host virtual machines only. So containers won't have its own OS. So let's see some key features of containers. So first one is portability. So containers consist of code, dependencies, config file, everything, right? So that means they can be easily moved across different environments without worrying about any compatibility issues. That is nothing but portability. Second one is container is lightweight. So unlike VMs, which require a full operating system for each instances, so containers share the host operating system's kernel only. That means faster start time and lower overhead. That's why containers are lightweight. So in one VM, we can host multiple containers, but all of those containers runs in isolation from each other. That means in one VM, we can host multiple applications, and those application containers doesn't interfere with each other while running. Since containers include everything the application needs to run, they ensure that the application behaves the same way, regardless of where it is deployed. That is nothing but consistency. So containers are designed to be easily scalable, so you can run multiple containers when the load is increased, and you can orchestrate these containers using applications like Kubernetes. So we'll learn Kubernetes also in this course. Stay tuned for that. So now let's install Docker and let's create our first container. So let's install Docker now. So to install Docker, we need a virtual machine. So let's create instance or virtual machines now. So to create instance, we can use any one of the cloud platform like AWS, Azure, or GCP. So I'm using GCP, and here I'm going to compute engine and click on VM instances to create a VM. So in GCP you will get 3 months or 90 days free trial, so you can utilize that for creating any instances or to learn in GCP. Also you can use those 90 days free trial. So I'm using that now. So click on create instance here to create one of virtual machine. So you can give a name for this particular virtual machine. I will give Docker demo. Then you can choose region and zone. So I will keep it as default, and I will keep everything as default. And I will change the boot disk actually. So in boot disk I can change it to Ubuntu. So I am comfortable with Ubuntu, so I'm choosing Ubuntu. And boot disk version will be 20.04 is fine. So that is LTS version, and size I will change it to 20 GB. Then click on select. Then I will allow HTTP and HTTPS traffic because I'm going to create a container application. So to access that particular application, I need HTTP and HTTPS traffic. Then let's click on create. So my instance is created now, and to access this instance, I have to add my SSH key into this particular instance. So let's create SSH key in my local. So for that I have the command called as SSH keygen. So we can run that. So let's paste that command and it will create a SSH key pair now. Then give a path, and I'm going to override that previous key. Then it's created key now. This is the path for a public key. So I'm going to copy this key and paste that in my instance. So copy that and cat that path and copy this key into my instance. So click on edit in the instance and search for SSH and add item, and paste your key here and click on save. So now SSH key is added to my instance, so I'm going to access this from my local. For that I have the command SSH, then my username, that is Sandesh2026, at the IP I can get it from this particular instance. External IP I have to add. So if I go here and I can copy here external IP and paste it. So now I have logged into my instance. Now let's install Docker. So to install Docker, search for Docker on Ubuntu in any browser and click on first document, that is install Docker engine on Ubuntu. Then run these commands. So install commands. So copy those commands and run those commands. So first it will update my OS packages and other things. Then it will install the Docker. So it will take a couple of seconds or maybe 30 seconds or 1 minute to install all these packages. Let's wait for that. So once all the packages installed, then run next command, that is sudo apt install Docker engine and other things. So copy the command and paste. So Docker is installed now. To verify that I have to run one sample image, that is hello world image. Let's run that. So here you can see it gives the message like hello from Docker. So that means Docker is installed, but it is installed in root user. So let's switch into root user first. So sudo su. So now let's create an application using Docker. So to create any application, what we need source code plus dependencies, right? So first I need code. So I'm not going to write code now, but I'm going to copy the code from my GitHub repository. So I already have the source code here. So I'm going to copy this into my VM. For that I can run git clone and paste the URL link. So it will copy my source code to my local. So I will add this GitHub repository link in my description also. So you can also clone this repository and you can use that. So it created a folder called as node.js docker, that is my repository name. So we'll go inside that directory and here I have the code. So this is the node.js code, and first we see how we can deploy this without using the container. So to deploy node.js application, we need platform first. That platform is nothing but node is platform. Then we need source code. Then we have to install the dependencies. Dependencies we generally add it in package.json file. If you see package.json file here, it will list all the dependencies here. Here you can see express and body parsers are the dependencies. So you have to install these dependencies. For that we have the command called as npm install. Then we are going to run my application using node server.js. I go to node.js-docker. Here I have the code server.js. This is the main JS file. So we are going to run this application code. Now let's see how we can deploy this using the container. So we can't create Docker container directly. We have to create it from a template. That template is nothing but a Docker image. So to create a Docker image, we have to create a file. That file is Dockerfile. So this Dockerfile consists lot of instructions to carry out these particular actions. So let's create a Dockerfile now. So we create Dockerfile in the same folder where my source code is exist. So here only I'm going to create a Dockerfile, vi Dockerfile. And this Dockerfile I have to add all the instructions. So my first instruction will be adding the platform, that is node platform. So similar to GitHub, I have the Docker Hub. Here I can search for any base images. So node is my base image now. So search for node. There will be official node image will be available. So I am going to use this particular image now. For that, in Dockerfile I can add node. The instruction will be from node. So I am going to add this node as the base image for this particular Docker image. So my next instruction will be copy the source code. So for that I have the command called as copy the source code. The source code exists same directory as the Dockerfile, so I can just give the dot, and the destination directory can be anything. I am going to add it as an app directory, so it will copy the source code into this particular app directory in my Docker image. So next instruction will be installing the dependencies. For that I have the command npm install. So I have to run this command. For that in Dockerfile I can run npm install, and to run this command we have the Dockerfile instruction, that is run. So this npm install will install all the dependencies that is listed in this package.json. So this package.json should be there in the same directory. So this package.json will be there in this /app directory because I have copied source code into /app directory. So I have to change the working directory. For that I have the command called as workdir into /app directory. Then I have to run the application using node server.js. So this run command will not work because this run command will run while creating the image. So I have to install the dependencies while creating the image, but I have to run this application while creating the container. So to run while creating the container, I have the command called as cmd instead of run. And cmd has its own syntax. So I have to add the command in a square bracket and with the double quotes, and will be separated with a comma. So run will execute while creating the image, cmd will execute while creating the container. So just remember the difference between run and cmd. Then one more thing, this is a web application and web application generally has the port. So if I check my server.js file, it will have the port defined in that particular file. If I check here and you can see here app listen 80 port. So it is listening on 80 port. So I have to add that also in my Docker file. So for that, add an instruction called as expose 80 port. Then just save the file. So now my Docker file is ready. Now I have to create a Docker image from that. So to create or build a Docker image, I have the command called as docker build and the path for Docker file, that is dot only because Docker file exists in same directory. So docker build dot. So while creating image, it will execute all the instructions that I have defined in my Docker file. You can see here from that node image, then copying the source code, then working directory change, npm install. So all these instructions will be executed while creating the image. So once image is created, I can run docker images to list the images created. So I can see two images here. One is hello world, that is created while installing the Docker. This is the image created now. Now I'm going to create a container based on this particular image. So now let's run docker run and the image, that is this image ID. If I run this and if I try to access this from my browser, so in browser you can access this from my external IP and the port is 80. So we got a site can't be reached page. So if I check my Docker file, I have added a step called as export 80 port. So this 80 port will be my application or container port. I have to mention one more port called as host port. So this expose 80 port is just a documentation step. So it just gives the information like we are using 80 port as the application port. So if you don't add this step also, it will work same way. So as the best practice, you can add expose 80 instruction, but the important thing is while running docker run, I have to add a command called -p flag. I have to give my application port, that is 80, and before that I have to mention the host port. That host port can be anything, but I am going to mention 3000 as my host port. Then paste image ID and click enter. Now in browser, if I open with the same external IP and the port 3000, the app should be open. Now if I add anything in browser, it should reflect in my command line also. If I click on set channel goal, now if I check in my command line, it's added here also, teach docker. So now we have containerized this application. So that's it for today's session. So today we have learned about what is Docker, what is containers and key features of containers. Then we have installed the Docker in one of the instances. Then we created a Docker file. Then we built a Docker image from that Docker file. Then we created a container. So we have created a containerized application today. In next session we'll learn more on Docker. So subscribe and check out my other videos too and keep learning.